the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the beginning, I would like to welcome the Special Envoy, and I wish him every success in his mandate. Mr. President, I would like to make a few remarks. I will not speak at length, so that this discussion will not be derailed. Today, we speak of the political track, not the humanitarian track. Hence, I will not comment at length on some remarks that pertain to a previous meeting that was held on the humanitarian situation. Nonetheless, first, my country has a strong conviction in multilateral diplomacy. Hence, we were one of the founding states of this organization. We were considered victorious over those who violate international law. Hence, when we speak from a political and diplomatic perspective, we speak out of our belief in international law. This council is not an entity of private sector owned by one country, and it's not a store where the owner would select clientele. This particular council is responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. We are not here to personalize issues or to politicize issues according to whims. It is normal not to agree, but this has to be done according to norms, and we go by the book, as we say in English. And our book is the Charter, my dear friend, the representative of the United States. Our book is the Charter and the provisions of international law. How would you react if some country would establish the Mexican, American, Syrian, Iraqi doctors, call it whatever you wish, and we send it to the US-Mexican border without the approval of the American administration, without coordination, and we send this society to care for the Guatemalans who are facing death every day? This is respect of international law. This is respect of the Charter. Humanitarian work requires that the law should be respected. OCHA is working in Syria with the approval of the Syrian government. Their work is purely humanitarian. There are 27 NGOs operating in Syria with the approval of the Syrian government. But to have some sending us intelligence groups under human pretext across the borders with Turkey under the pretext that they are performing humanitarian work, this is unacceptable. We need to draw the attention of the Council to this particular fact. And when we objected to the colleague from the UK interrupting our statement, this was also based on laws and procedures. Any representative that wishes to interrupt has to go through the presidency. We don't keep interrupting each other as if we are in a circus. We have to show some respect to each other, even if we disagree politically. I do not object to the fact that the colleague from the UK wanted to take the floor to make a point of order, but she should do this according to procedure, asking the President to grant such point of order. Mr. President, the utter silence of the Security Council after more than 50 years of Israel's occupation of the Syrian Golan, and I thank you for concluding your statement with a reference to the occupation of the Golan. This has encouraged the American administration to backtrack on the provisions of Security Council Resolution 497 of 1981 that considered Israel's decision, Israel being the occupying power according to UN description, Israel's decision to impose its laws and administration and authority on the Golan null and void and without international legal effect. This is part of the provisions of Resolution 497. This attempted backtracking has been embodied in the Donald Trump recognizing Israeli sovereignty on the occupied Syrian Golan, riding roughshod over the commitment of all previous American administrations to the provisions of Resolution 497. Naturally, this utter silence has encouraged the Israeli occupation that is well known for its depravity. It has encouraged it to have impunity, and this is protected by the US and a number of member states, encouraged Israel to continue to occupy Arab territory and to usurp, confiscate our land, and to expand settlement and to go back on comprehensive, just peace commitments and to push the region towards war. And they are forming an alliance with herds of Takfiri terrorism, and they are supporting these gangs in the area of separation, and they're committing various aggressions against my country to boost the morale of these terrorist groups. And here, very briefly, I would like to comment on the remarks of Germany when he said that we accuse those humanitarian workers of terrorism. Yes, we do. When his country and other countries smuggled the white helmets through the Golan to other Western capitals, this reaffirms that they are terrorist groups. What were they doing in the area of separation in Golan? An area where there are UNDOF forces, and terrorists cannot be present in this area. Why did these governments, including the government of Germany, why did they receive those terrorists that were smuggled from the area of separation in Golan? Why didn't they go through Turkey or Jordan or through Lebanon? Terrorists. They are terrorists. Mr. President, the US-Israeli position that disrespects international law and resolutions of the UN does not stop at this. Israel has escalated the tension as it announced a new settlement in the occupied Syrian Golan under the title Trump Heights as a reward by Israel to the President of the United States for violating resolutions of international law and this council when he recognized Israel's sovereignty on the Syrian Golan. This is one example in a series of provocations and violations of international law and illegal settlement that has been condemned by this council repeatedly. And the American president replied, and I quote, "Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for this great honor," end of quote. A great honor. Mr. Trump says that Israel would establish a settlement on the occupied Syrian Golan under the name of Trump. And then he replies, thanking them for this great honor. As if he's expressing his happiness to add a compound to the real estate collection that he owns across the world, completely ignoring that this settlement will be established over an occupied land, a land that Trump or no other has the right to dispose of. The silence by the Council has encouraged senior UN officials to shirk the responsibility in accordance with their mandate, a mandate that we, the member states, have approved. UN officials are supposed to follow the UN agenda and no other agenda. And they are responsible before us, the member states, so as to undertake their functions fully. Some of you might say that the permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic is unjustly accusing senior UN officials, and that this cannot happen in this chamber. No, I'm not falsely accusing anyone. I have proof. And proof is that Mr. Mladinov, the special coordinator of the peace process in the Middle East, continues to go beyond his mandate and his functions. He still insists in a provocative manner that is no longer tolerated to to ignore discussing situation in the occupied Syrian Golan, and he does not point out the position of the UN vis-à-vis the occupation, despite dozens of resolutions adopted in this council and organization. And in his periodic briefing, he deliberately does not discuss the continued Israeli violations in the occupied Syrian Golan. And I will give you an example. In his most recent briefing on the situation in the Middle East on the 20th of June, he did not notice that the Israeli government held a meeting in the Julan on the 16th of June. And he did not notice that they have announced to establish a new settlement under the name Trump Heights. However, he was quite forthcoming when it comes to detailing elements on one goat that crossed the separation line to part of the occupied Syrian Golan. Also, his colleagues, senior officials of the UN, were quite forthcoming also when it comes to the Syrian authorities granting one entry visa here and denying another there. This is all they talk about. One goat crossing the line and the issue of entry visas. But the establishment of a height under the name Trump Height, Mr. Madinov never heard of that. Mr. President, attempts to perpetuate the Israeli occupation through the past years coincided with the sponsorship of major Western states of terrorism and extremist ideologies and attempts to replace spiritual Islam with political Islam that has nothing to do with Holy Islam. And Erdogan, after having been abandoned by Europe and after having his dream vanish to join the EU, now he looks to his neighbors east and south to revive the Ottoman Sultanate that would never come back. But this dream would never come true, especially after a number of political Islam leaders took power in a number of Arab states after so much bloodshed. Some people would like to praise this as Arab Spring, and hence he opened the border in a major terrorist project for the passage of FTFs after having provided them with all logistical and armed support in training camps. And after that, he even launched an aggression against my country and occupied part of our territory. Mr. President, all that I mentioned could be described as a masterminded assassination by countries of international law and the Charter, and there has been many other assassinations by other countries of the Charter in Vietnam, Yugoslavia, Somalia, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen, and many countries in Africa and Latin America. These assassinations has led to the killing and displacement of tens of millions, and these countries incurred trillions of dollars in losses. Hence, the only path for this organization to avoid meeting the same fate of the League of Nations is for countries to abide by the provisions of the Charter, and particularly Article 2 in paragraphs 1, 4, and 7, as it stresses sovereign equality of all states, and that all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against territorial integrity or political independence of any state. And the Charter does not include any elements that allow countries to intervene in the sovereign decisions of other countries. Disillusionment and admittance of guilt, which is mea culpa in English, and a return to these noble principles would guarantee the unity of this council and its defense of the provisions of the Charter, and would give impetus to the work of the Special Envoy and the serious parties that seek to reach a political settlement of the crisis in my country and to coordinate efforts to combat terrorism. My government reaffirms that it's ready to work with the Special Envoy to make his mission a success as he facilitates intra-Syrian dialogue, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, to push the political track forward. And this is in the interest of Syria before being in the interest of any other party. We also reaffirm that what's happening in Syria cannot be reduced to a mere disagreement on names and procedures on the formation of the Constitutional Committee, despite their importance. It's a much bigger picture because this issue, namely the Constitutional Committee, is just the tip of the iceberg. There is an iceberg that goes deep for kilometers. This is just the tip of an iceberg, a big iceberg. Without the concerted efforts of all, without support for the Syrian government as it combats terrorism, and without ending illegal foreign presence on all of the Syrian land and ending unilateral economic measures, and without actually maintaining the unity, sovereignty, and independence of Syria, without all of this, any political track that does not take all of this into consideration would remain unrealistic and with no horizon as a solution. And when we speak of maintaining the unity, sovereignty, and independence of Syria, as you have said, Mr. President, and as many colleagues have said, this is part of your mandate. These are the concepts that are in line with the Charter, and these are the elements of your resolutions on Syria. I thank you, Mr. President. I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement.